Imagine a quiet town where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. But behind the locked doors of one family's home, secrets festered until they could no longer be hidden. The case that would soon unfold left investigators shaken, neighbors horrified, and the truth more twisted than anyone could have predicted. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. It's the kind of story that chills you long after it ends, because every piece of it is real. And once you see what was uncovered, you'll never look at ordinary families the same way again. Don't miss out on the next chilling mystery. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you're the first to know when new stories drop. At first glance, it was an ordinary family, living an ordinary life in a small American town. Neighbors described them as quiet, private, even a little withdrawn, but nothing that raised alarm. The parents worked odd jobs, the children were rarely seen playing outside, and the house itself seemed almost frozen in time, untouched by the rhythm of the world around it. But behind that stillness, there were whispers. Teachers noticed a child missing too many school days, explanations that never quite lined up. Friends recalled strange excuses for why visits were suddenly canceled, why doors always remained locked, and why the family grew more and more detached from the community. On the surface, everything looked intact. Yet for investigators, who would later piece together the fragments, the warning signs were already there, subtle, fragile cracks in the facade of normalcy. It's often said that evil hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of the familiar. And here, in this unassuming neighborhood, that mask was slipping. No one could have predicted how far the truth reached, or how horrifying the story behind those drawn curtains would become. The questions began quietly, almost unnoticed. Rumors passed from one neighbor to another, fragments of concern dismissed as gossip. But soon, those whispers grew impossible to ignore. A child who was said to live in the home had not been seen in months. Friends recalled birthdays with no guests, excuses that shifted with every retelling, and a family that seemed to vanish from social gatherings altogether. Local authorities received calls, concerned voices asking them to check on the welfare of the missing child. Each time, the family offered explanations: homeschooling, visiting relatives, illness. Explanations that sounded reasonable enough to close the file, but hollow enough to linger in the minds of those who asked the questions. Then came the reports from teachers and neighbors that painted a different picture, one of isolation, of secrecy, and of a home that grew darker with each passing season. Utility workers noted that blinds were always drawn tight, deliveries stacked at the doorstep, and a silence that seemed unnatural. Investigators tried to make sense of the contradictions. No official record of school attendance, medical visits that never happened, and the family's story shifting just slightly each time it was told. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to form, but the edges refused to fit. What chilled detectives most was not the absence of proof, but the absence of presence. A life supposedly lived, but never seen. A child that existed only in paperwork, photos, and the words of parents who seemed more rehearsed with each questioning. As the pressure grew, the family grew defensive. Doors stayed closed to authorities. Questions were met with hostility, silence, or the same recycled excuses. Yet the more they resisted, the more suspicion grew. The very act of protecting their secrets became the evidence of something much darker hiding within those walls. The case that began as concern soon shifted into something heavier, something darker. It was no longer just about a missing child. It was about whether the truth had been buried long before the questions were asked. And as investigators would discover, sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't found in what is said, but in the chilling silence of what isn't. The moment of truth came when investigators obtained a search warrant for the family home. What they expected to find was simple: proof that the missing child was alive and well. But what they uncovered instead would shake even the most seasoned detectives. Inside, the house told a story no one wanted to hear. Rooms once meant for comfort now felt abandoned, layered in dust, possessions untouched for months. The child's belongings were still there, clothes neatly folded, toys lined on shelves, but no trace of a life being lived. It was as if time had stopped. Neighbors had been told the child was away, yet the evidence inside whispered a different reality. Medical records showed no recent visits, school documents falsified, photographs displayed on the walls, but always the same ones, never updated. A portrait of a life frozen, curated to maintain an illusion. As detectives dug deeper, the family's story unraveled. Every excuse, every carefully crafted explanation collapsed under the weight of hard evidence. The horrifying truth was no longer hidden. It had been sitting in plain sight, disguised as normalcy. And the most chilling discovery wasn't just the absence of the child. It was the realization that those sworn closest to protect them had become the architects of their disappearance. In that moment, suspicion turned to certainty, and the case shifted from a mystery into a devastating truth. Years have passed since the truth was pulled into the light, yet the shadows it cast remain. The parents, once seen as protectors, now sit behind prison walls, serving sentences that ensure they will never walk free again. Their silence inside the courtroom became a permanent silence in life, an unspoken acknowledgement of a crime that stole more than just one childhood. For investigators, the case lingers like a scar. Files may be closed, but the unanswered questions remain. How long had the truth been hidden? Were there others who knew more than they admitted? And why did it take so long for the world to see what was happening behind those drawn curtains? The family home still stands, but it has become something else entirely. Neighbors pass it in silence, its windows dark, its walls empty. It is less a house now than a monument, a reminder of what happens when warning signs are ignored, when silence is mistaken for peace. And then there's the absence, the life that never returned, the child whose laughter never filled those rooms again. A headstone in a quiet graveyard marks their name, but it cannot capture the enormity of the loss. It cannot erase the haunting thought that maybe, just maybe, someone could have stopped it sooner. Today, the case is remembered not just for its tragedy, but for its warning, that evil often hides behind ordinary doors, and that sometimes the scariest mysteries are not the ones left unsolved, but the ones we didn't ask soon enough. Some stories fade with time, softened by memory until they lose their edge. But this one remains sharp, cutting through the years with the same chilling force as the day it was uncovered. It isn't just the crime itself that haunts. It's the silence that allowed it to grow, the unanswered questions that linger in its wake. Even now, neighbors remember the house on that quiet street. Some refuse to walk past it. Others cross the road without looking. For them, it is not just a house, but a symbol of how easily darkness can live in plain sight. The investigators who worked the case admit it never truly left them. Files were closed, sentences handed down, yet the echoes continue. Every missing child report, every unexplained absence, pulling their thoughts back to this one case, the kind of case that changes how you see the world forever. And perhaps that's what lingers most, the unsettling truth that monsters do not always come in shadows or strangers' faces. Sometimes they sit at the dinner table. Sometimes they are the ones who smile to neighbors while hiding a secret no one wants to imagine. The story is closed, but the warning remains. How many other secrets hide behind locked doors, waiting to be uncovered? How many other lives are silenced before anyone dares to ask the right question? With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.